Hello, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining our session today. My name is Emily Cook, I'm a business psychologist at Thrive, and I'm joined by my colleague and co-host Alyssa McCrease. Hi.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today.
So before we get started, just a bit of housekeeping. We are going to be answering some Q&A at the end. So there is a function where you can submit questions throughout. You can also submit a chat as well throughout, and myself and Alyssa will be monitoring both of those throughout. So we'll come to questions at the end, but if any come up that we think are relevant for what we're talking about, we will try and answer them as we go along. So we are going to be talking today about what burnout actually is. It is National Carers Week, so we thought it was a really important topic. We're going to look at how you can detect it, some common signs. We're also going to talk about compassion fatigue and some of the interventions that you can help to prevent burnout, both as an employer and as an individual. And then finally, we are really pleased to be joined by our guest speaker, who is Jamie Broadley. Hi, Jamie.
I'll unmute myself. Hi, how are we doing?
Jamie works for Derbyshire Community Health Services as their staff wellbeing lead, so we're going to ask him a few questions a bit later. So we're going to start by looking at what burnout actually is. It is a state of emotional, physical and mental exhaustion, and it's usually as a result of chronic stress that hasn't been properly managed. Now, it's often considered in the context of work, and in the UK, we've seen quite an increase in the number of people with work-related stress, anxiety and depression in the last few years. And this increase in workplace burnout means that on the one hand, people have become a lot more aware of mental health and feel more comfortable reporting issues. But it can also indicate that work demands have increased. I'm sure we're all aware that over the last few years, the world of work has shifted dramatically in the last decade. So we've got new technologies where we've got flexible working and also globalization, and all of these things have really forced us to adapt. And burnout is commonly portrayed as an adaptation disorder, meaning that a person might be unable to cope with the current stresses they face and may need some adjustment to their lifestyle in order to recover. So for the purpose of this session, we are going to focus the majority of our examples primarily on workplace burnout, but burnout can happen outside of the workplace too, such as in parents or when your primary job is caring for someone at home. So most of the advice we'll be giving can be easily applied to different situations that can result in the same burnt out state.
Yeah, so I'm going to be talking a bit about how to detect burnout. Burnout comprises three distinct dimensions, which are exhaustion, cynicism, and sense of inefficacy. Exhaustion is a key component of burnout. It can lead to people distancing themselves both emotionally and mentally from their role, whether this can be in the workplace or caregiving setting. It's likely that this is a type of coping strategy, but one that's really not helpful or adaptive. Cynicism or depersonalization is the attitude that someone develops as a result of experiencing exhaustion. It's a general negative attitude towards work that can affect the way a person recognizes failures and successes. So successes wouldn't be as rewarding and failures would be overemphasized, which can trap a person in a vicious cycle of negativity. Later, we'll talk about how learning different coping strategies, such as cognitive behavioral skills, can help you identify those negative and unhelpful thoughts and change them to more helpful ones. Reduced self-efficacy comes about as a person regularly evaluates their past and present accomplishments negatively, resulting in a diminished sense of competence and loss of productivity. Learning to accept and not dwell on these worries of the past or the future is really a vital part of improving your mental well-being. So practicing psychological coping strategies and mindfulness techniques can help you with this, and Emily will go through this in more detail later. These dimensions are common among people who feel burned out. However, it's really important that you keep in mind that both the person and the social context needs to be taken into consideration. This is because burnout is typically a result of an imbalance between the work environment and the person, rather than exclusively down to the individual. Meaning that when someone starts feeling burned out, it can result in demands being placed on them which are maybe too high, and their individual resources are diminished, so they will not be able to cope. So we need to adjust those demands to help the person cope again. So this is the same for any unexpected stressor we might have to deal with, such as this COVID-19 outbreak. This is an additional stressor which, added to all the already existent stressors, can end up pushing us to our limits if not managed well. I would just like to note that job-related burnout in itself can be really tricky to diagnose or detect due to the naturally occurring fluctuations in well-being and job performance. This is why it's so important to have an open dialogue about this and keep in mind that even when someone is productive at work, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are not feeling burned out.
So chronic stress can lead to physical symptoms like the ones that you see here. I don't know what has happened to my slide there. Sometimes these physical symptoms can actually precede the psychological ones, which is your body's way of telling you that something needs to change. So just being aware of some of these symptoms can really help you to identify if you might be affected by stress and actually then prevent burnout from occurring. But from a psychological perspective, burnout causes people to feel drained of energy and emotion. People can also experience feelings of hopelessness, which can exacerbate feeling low and impact your motivation. And guilt is also another common feeling, especially when burnout is caused by caring for someone close to you, whether that be a relative or even a child. And extreme tiredness and a lack of energy can actually impact the way that you work or other things at home. And these feelings are often gradual, so they can be hard to spot, especially at the beginning. But in general, burnout mainly affects everyday tasks at work or at home if your main job involves caring for family members. But people experiencing burnout can often feel negative about tasks they have and have difficulty with being creative. So it's really important to remember that burnout will affect people in different ways. And as we've said before, is both influenced by individual factors and also contextual factors like the workplace, the environment they're in, and so on. But aside from the obvious physical and psychological outcomes of burnout, another risk is that it might lead to something which is called compassion fatigue, which is a state of emotional withdrawal along with exhaustion after caring for sick or traumatized people for an extended period of time. And it can also lead to a dampened sense of empathy and concern for people who are suffering. So in a healthcare setting, this can actually lead to a significant detachment from your job, which can impact your workability and affect the people in your care. Often states of burnout and compassion fatigue happen without us even realizing it until it starts actually having a noticeable impact. So the first step to preventing burnout and subsequent compassion fatigue is actually understanding it and then recognizing it. And Ilyssa's going to talk about some of the things that can influence that now.
Yeah. So as we mentioned before, the main cause of burnout is an imbalance between high demands placed on the person, like workload and time pressure, lack of resources available, and maybe social support or time. Successful workplace strategies to prevent burnout and reduce work-related stress really focus on providing sufficient resources as well as having demands adjusted to the person. It's also worth saying that whilst too many demands can lead to burnout, having too little can negatively impact well-being too, because not being stimulated can lead to boredom or disengagement. The point here is that regardless of the environment you're in, it's important to strike a balance between demands and resources in order to prevent significant stress and burnout. You'll see some examples of personal and work-related demands and resources on this slide. The reality is that some of these will be outside of your control. So it's about being able to go back to the point we made earlier about finding a good balance. If there are job-related stressors that are outside of your control, then it can help you to increase your personal resources by learning strategies to build your resilience. This could include relaxation exercises, CBT skills, mindfulness, or simply leaning on your social networks. We'll now take a look at some things that both employers and individuals can do to prevent burnout. So to begin with, we'll talk about organizational context and what an employer can do. As a manager or employer, you should focus on strategies that aim to alter someone's work environment. This can be done by adjusting workload, changing or developing leadership, encouraging teamwork and community, and providing mutual feedback. Businesses should also focus strategies around 6 key areas of work life, which are shown to influence well-being at work. This is workload, control, reward, community, fairness, and values. So mismatches can be different for each employee. It's so important to find what each employee is feeling more valuable about. And so support and resources should be adjusted accordingly to what the employee needs. As burnout is a diverse condition and the reason for its development is not always the same for everyone. Thus, incorporating both individually and occupationally focused interventions could be promising in alleviating burnout.
We've got a question, Alyssa, but for some reason I can't open it. I don't know whether you can.
Yeah, I've got it.
You can.
So what's the difference between depression and burnout? The symptoms crossover. I think we should answer this question a little bit later because we'll probably have to go in a bit more detail there.
Let's do that. I think that's a good idea. Okay, so as an individual, there are 2 main approaches you can focus on, and this is either by reducing demands at work or increasing the kind of resources you have to do your job, or building on your personal resources. So we'll go into this a bit more now. When you focus on workplace resources, it's really important that you find someone you can talk to about changes you'd like or any additional support, whether it's your manager or someone from HR or within a wellbeing role. I really want to emphasize how important it is to have an open dialogue with your managers, because any adaptations to work need to be a collaborative decision, and they've got to involve both yourself and your manager. So having open communication is also another form of social support, as opposed to trying to handle everything yourself, which can really help to alleviate some of that pressure. Another strategy you can use is by optimizing your work environment yourself, and this is called job crafting. So job crafting encourages people to adjust the characteristics of their job to their own abilities and needs and preferences, so that there's no discrepancies between the demands of the job and the effort required to meet them. I know it sounds too good to be true, and obviously there will be certain jobs that you can't modify too much, but adjustments can always be made. So it's really important to try and foster a good relationship with both your employer and your co-workers, so that you can feel more comfortable raising issues and asking for support where possible. So this then brings us on to the question, what can we do to build our resilience outside of work? Personal resources are perhaps the most significant, I think, about all of this, because there are things that we have control over, and these are the kind of things that we can develop. And it does require some discipline and practice, but if you build your awareness and then start implementing some of these things into your everyday life, this can be a really good place to start. So if you are starting to feel like you are getting burnt out, then rather than focusing on alleviating those burnout symptoms, you could start by working towards a bit more of a positive goal, such as increasing your engagement and enthusiasm for work. And you can do this by making sure that you take enough time every day for self-care. And I know that this can be quite hard if you're working in a shift-based role and you're working 12 hours a day and you come home and you've got things to do at home. But even just giving yourself kind of 30 minutes a day to do something for yourself, whether that's cooking, reading, spending time with family or friends, or doing some sort of relaxation exercises, it can really help you to detach from work. So you need to allow yourself that time to recover and rejuvenate, so that the next day you can return to work and your responsibilities with a bit more of a fresh mindset, and that can really help you to alleviate those kind of feelings of burnout. There are other things you can do, like learning cognitive behavioural skills as well. So in a nutshell, CBT helps you to get a better understanding of your thoughts, your feelings and your emotions, and how they interact with one another to influence behaviour. And it can also help you to identify triggers in your environment so that you feel better prepared to deal with them. And it can help you to challenge unhelpful thoughts like I'm a failure to more helpful ones like I can learn valuable lessons by making mistakes. So going through a CBT program and learning those kind of skills, you can really help to build your resilience, especially when you're faced with stressful situations. And you'll enable yourself to react more calmly, more effectively, rather than being overwhelmed by emotions, which can then impact your the way that you respond to them. Mindfulness and relaxation exercises are also really useful to learn because they can help you to control those kind of fight, flight, or freeze symptoms that you may experience when you are in a stressful situation. And these are things like increased heart rate, shallow breathing, sweaty palms, an upset stomach, and so on. These are essentially your body getting ready for action, which is crucial in situations when we're in immediate danger. But in everyday scenarios, they can really deplete our resources and make us less able to cope. Most of us can bounce back quite quickly when we have that kind of stress response. But if we let it go on without actually maintaining it or making them better, it can have a real impact on both your physical and your mental health. We can try other exercises as well because there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. So mindfulness and meditation might work for one person, whereas more of those mind-body exercises can work better for other people. So deep muscle relaxation and calm breathing are an example. They are body-based relaxation exercises, and they have a real bottom-up influence by releasing tension in the body and focusing on your breath and the different sensations in a way to then relax your mind. On the other hand, meditation and things like self-suggestion and mindfulness are essentially attention training exercises. And these can teach you how attention can get captured by worrying or negative thoughts, and then how not to let them consume you. The Thrive app, if hopefully all of you have seen it, if you haven't already, take a look and have a look at the Thrive app because it's got all of these techniques in them and you can try them out and see which ones work best for you. We recommend that everyone works their way through the CBT program first and then moves on to some of the relaxation exercises, because regardless of whether you feel affected by stress or not, these are really valuable life skills which can be applied in all kinds of situations. So this brings us on to our next part. We wanted to talk about burnout in the healthcare industry. It is a common risk factor, especially in healthcare workers, and it's definitely been a heightened risk during the pandemic. If you think about all of the factors that we've talked about that can lead to burnout, the design of jobs within a healthcare setting is quite rigid. People are exposed to trauma and suffering on a consistent basis. Most roles are shift-based with physical demands, and some people might feel like they're not properly compensated for their efforts, whether that be financially or through the provision of adequate resources and support. So the frequency of this kind of diversity and these demands explains why doctors and nurses are among the most vulnerable to burnout. So we have invited Jamie Broadley from Derbyshire Community Health Services NHS Trust to join us and answer some questions. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Elissa, do you want to be doing a bit of an intro, because you work quite closely with DCHS?
Yeah, sure. So we have partnered with DCHS for about a year now, if I'm right. So we're supporting them with their wellbeing strategy. They're a wellbeing team of only a few people. So they're looking after a couple thousand employees, around 7,000 employees, if I'm right. So they needed a component of their strategy which is far-reaching and easily accessible to everyone at all times. So this is where Thrive plays its role and supports them. So Jamie is here to share some insight into some things they do to support the well-being of their staff and to prevent workplace burnout. So yeah, Jamie, thanks for coming and thanks for joining us. Would you like to give us a quick introduction about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, thank you. So as you've said, my role is staff wellbeing lead in Derbyshire Community Health Services. We also cover Derbyshire Healthcare, which is the mental health trust. So we're about 7,000 staff across Derbyshire, and through COVID, we've been working with all the other trusts there as well, and Thrive is now available across all of those too. So you're doing yourselves a disservice, because I think you've now got 30,000 NHS staff across Derbyshire signed up, which is brilliant. Personally, my background is psychology and professional sport, so I'm really interested in that kind of intersect between well-being and performance, because all of what we're talking about here, like, we know what we need to do for well-being, but that's got to work within the context of being able to do our jobs, whether that be a professional role, a caring role, whatever. So as you said, we're quite a small team, as the vast majority of NHS wellbeing teams will be. And we've got our kind of standard occupational health service offer, and then we've got an in-house counselling service. We do a host of training and coaching and those sort of things as well, which I'm sure we'll get into as we go through this.
Yeah. So this leads me to my first question. In your experience, is burnout a real concern in the healthcare industry?
Yeah, definitely. So we've actually done some research in DCHS around this, and we aim to just kind of answer that simple question of what causes staff to go off sick, because as you can imagine, and you'll see plenty of it in the news, making sure we've got adequate staff is really, really important for us, and that's one of our biggest challenges across the NHS at the minute. And obviously, as more staff, if they go off, then that means it's more pressure on the staff that are there. So it's really important for us to keep as many on the front line as possible. The answers in that research came back and kind of demonstrated what you've talked through already, that job demands resource model. And the biggest bit that came out for us on the personal resources side was self-compassion, and trying to make sure we've got those self-compassion behaviours there, which help prevent compassion fatigue. And if you think about it in the NHS, it's what I term a habit of role. So when you are working all day in a caring profession, it's very difficult to take that hat off and to then focus that lens on yourself. There's also a bit of self-selection that we've found, that people that tend to be in caring roles often do so because that's more comfortable than caring for themselves in some ways, and there's a bit of a personality pull on that. Obviously, I'm generalising there. And also, if you look at the demographics of our workforce, and again, this is across the NHS, it tends to be those that are middle-aged. It's a very female-dominated workforce, and that means that we often see that kind of squeezed middle we talk about, where we've got people who've got children that might be going through school, need childcare still, and then elderly parents who will potentially lead to caring responsibilities, obviously as the focus of this week. So that means that there's an awful lot going on for them, and it's very difficult for them to take that caring hat off and focus on themselves, and that's where we see some of the burnout that we've been talking about so far.
Do you think that this has become a bit more of a risk during the pandemic? Have you noticed any trends, things increasing, or?
Yeah, so I think we're at a really interesting point in the whole process now. So when COVID started, there was probably an assumption on all parts, not just in the NHS, but across the media as well, that we needed to get through the peak, try and flatten the curve, and then we'd be out the other side and we'll get back to normal. And that isn't what we're seeing. So I think the work that everyone did through lockdown and the social distance and all the rest of it, that really worked initially to make sure that the NHS wasn't overwhelmed. But what we're seeing now is the very long tail of that. And certainly the services that we provide, so community services and mental health services, our peak is going to be far beyond the initial COVID peak. So the people who've not been able to access the same level of healthcare that they would normally require, so those are long-term conditions, those that are more elderly, frail, and all the rest of it. And that's not to mention the kind of the mental health side of things. And there's a lot of predictions around a real surge in mental health conditions on the other side of this, just through isolation and everything else that's been going on at the minute. So yeah, I think we started with an initial adrenaline response that we needed to get through those initial 6, 9, 12 weeks. We're through those now, and people are tired, and they're starting to realise that this is going on for an awful lot longer. And the unique bit about this is that all of us are in caring roles during this time, whilst also being affected ourselves. And that's quite a unique situation. The vast majority of the time that you'll be caring for people who are in a different situation to you, and that separation, that boundary, can make it easier to self-care. So that's another challenge at the minute.
Mm. So how do you encourage your staff to really manage their stress and manage to come to acceptance with the fact that this is going to be a long-term pressure that they're going to be facing?
Yeah, so it goes back to that kind of habit of role piece, and it's about reminding people that they are actually stressed and feeling some of these things, because obviously our attention is the vast majority of the time on other people. So we use really simple check-in tools. Like really cheesy sounding, but stress bingo. So you had a slide a few ago about some of the common signs and symptoms. We use that an awful lot, both with individuals and teams, just getting people to check in and recognise, actually, if I am starting to feel stressed, what are the first signs and symptoms that I'm going to notice? And for some people, it might be a case of we get them to set timers and every hour check in and say, actually, what am I feeling at the minute? When we're busy, when we're caring for others, we lose that focus. So we need to build that habit back in. Off the back of that, if you then recognizing that actually I've got kind of 3 of my 5 symptoms flashing up, then what's your self-care plan from that? That's the opportunity then, when you've got that hook, to be able to might be go and use the Thrive app and use some of the relaxation exercises or the breathing exercises. It might be just go up and make a cup of tea, have a chat with a friend, some of the CBT work that our staff might be doing. So linking that bit through from that initial check-in. I think it's also really important to recognise that this isn't just an at-work thing. So all of our staff have the same challenges that the rest of the population that they're caring for do. So things like care and responsibilities, obviously we're talking about this week, finances, alcohol, all of those other kind of things that we'd see from a public health point of view. So we launched a campaign a couple of years ago that we run every year called I Wish My Manager Knew, which just creates a conversation between staff member and manager about what might be going on for them away from work as well. And we see that our counselling services, 70% of the referrals to that are for out of work reasons. So often it's work's the coping mechanism, and then when something gets difficult at work and something's difficult at home, that's where people can start to struggle. And obviously we've got that kind of tiered support, of which I can talk about in a bit more detail if needs be.
Yeah. So you really kind of primarily focus on that sort of social support and getting people to have, I suppose, a bit more of awareness about how they're feeling, because often that's where things can kind of build, isn't it? We're so fast to react to things, and we get a bit ahead of ourselves, and sometimes it's hard to realize whether something is actually starting to affect you until it gets to that breaking point.
Yeah, exactly that. And it's not comfortable. Looking in the mirror with this sort of stuff isn't easy, and especially when we're often in an expert role and we're advising others, it's difficult to turn that focus around and say, actually, you know what, I'm not okay at the minute. And that's where the work starts, and getting people to be able to feel comfortable to do that. And certainly in team situations and with managers, it's creating that psychological safety and that culture where people feel okay to be able to say, actually, I'm struggling today. Really simple things at the start of team meetings, going around and doing a check-in exercise. We use something called the blob tree quite a lot, which I don't know if you've ever heard of, but if people give that a Google, they can find that.
What's it? The blob tree?
The blob tree, yeah. So it's different. It's a tree with loads of different characters on it, in different poses, and you have to pick which one best represents you at that time. And it's just a really simple way of starting a conversation about how we feel, and that's all we're doing with any of those.
Yeah, no, it's really good also that you're making it part of a daily routine so people can really get into the habit, because it can really accumulate, and as we said, you do not realize the accumulation of different stresses that are happening until it's really too late. So making it part of the daily habit is so important. Can you maybe talk us through a case study or examples of burnout that you have come across within the NHS?
Yeah, so I thought I'd actually share a personal example on this one, because it illustrates the point that it can happen to all of us. And if I'm the person that's telling everyone else what to do with it, and I'm also being affected myself, then it kind of proves the point, doesn't it? So it shows how this stuff does sneak in. So about 3 weeks ago now, it was a Friday afternoon, and I'd done a day of back-to-back video calls, as I'm sure an awful lot of us are at the minute, and closed my laptop at whatever time it was and just lay on the floor. The poor dog didn't know what was going on, but that's all I could manage, and it took me about 40 minutes before I got up again, and it took the entire weekend to try and shake that off, and that wasn't something that I'd experienced before. And that was the point where I'd actually checked in with myself and recognized that things weren't working properly. And despite telling everyone else to do the check-in exercises, obviously in my role, it kind of ignored the fact that I needed to do it myself. So from that point of recognition, that's where it gets easier, because then we're all good problem solvers and we all know what we should be doing. It's just ways of finding the kind of the motivation, the push to do that. So some of the really simple things which I did were just around boundaries. So the work that we pull on an awful lot is Brené Brown's stuff around vulnerability. People are familiar with that. If not, her TED Talk's a great starting point. And boundaries is something that we're generally speaking not very good at. Yet actually, to be compassionate to ourselves, the first thing we need to do is to start instating some of those. So some of the stuff that I'd done in terms of time management pre-COVID around using out of offices to divert email traffic and manage expectations, things like that. And then just started looking at the architecture of my day, so making sure that it wasn't just back to back to back, moving meetings from an hour to 45 minutes, really simple things like that. Just give you those little, I call them punctuation marks through the day, where you can just take a bit of a breather and you're not flat out. I think there was a point where obviously we're all getting used to using this new technology and not being face to face as much. And once we got over that initial hurdle with that, we just started cramming our diaries with it, because we realized we could get more done. And whilst the technology supports that, our brains don't necessarily support that, and remembering that was a really important thing. And then just reminding myself of what we're actually here to do. If we're in roles that are a bit more strategic and you're looking at solving problems, then that's the kind of work that you need to be making sure you're in a position to do, and you don't come up with creative solutions when you're back to back all the time. So it's just going back to that. What's the why behind it? The kind of the Simon Sinek stuff was again another good forcing function for it. So I probably waffled at you there, but hopefully that makes a bit of sense.
No, you made some really interesting points. I think we've done a couple of sessions on kind of creating boundaries, setting schedules, and that's going to be really hard for people in this current situation. I mean, obviously, if you're in a caring role, a primary care setting, you're probably going to have been still at work, but there are people that are going to have experienced burnout that aren't in that kind of role, myself included. So you're exactly right. You just have to check in with yourself and sometimes just allow yourself to give a bit more time back into your day rather than cramming it full of things. Sorry, my Siri is deciding to go off. The joys of technology. Thank you so much for joining us, Jamie, and everyone. I hope that you found that useful. I can't access the Q&A, so I'm hoping, Alyssa, you can do that afterwards. But just as a bit of a recap, hopefully we've convinced you now that taking care of yourself is just as important, if not more, than caring for others, especially if your role is in that primary caregiving space. Burnout is the result of poorly managed stress, which is never just down to the individual. And so ensuring that you've got the adequate resources to manage those demands of your caregiving role, whether that's at work or in your personal life, will really help you to prevent burnout. And remember that it's okay to ask for support. Even simply talking to someone about how you're feeling and those stresses can really help to take the weight off your shoulders. And if you find it hard to switch off and de-stress, then you can try incorporating some relaxation or mindfulness techniques into your routine, because over time you will notice a difference. And some of these do require a bit of practice and discipline, but once you pick them up, you will start to notice a difference. And if you haven't already, make sure that you download the Thrive app and start trying some of the techniques. And finally, thank you, Jamie, for coming on and giving us some really helpful advice and sharing your experiences. So we wanted to see if anyone had any questions. Alyssa, I know we had one throughout at the beginning, which was about the differences between depression and burnout, which is quite a good one. I don't know, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, so the symptoms do cross over, especially when we're talking about, let's say, cynicism and sense of inefficacy, because that's what we were talking about before, as well as the sense of exhaustion. That's definitely a symptom of depression as well. However, I would say that clinical depression has many more dimensions to it than those three that we were covering, as well as the fact that depression does not necessarily need to relate to your job or the work that you do. So when we're talking about burnout, we're mostly talking about a specific reason to why this is happening to you, or a specific cause such as work overload or time pressure or anything job related, but obviously can also be like emotionally related. But I don't know, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, generally burnout kind of happens over time, and it's also not a clinical disorder. It's not in the diagnostic manuals, but depression can have a really quick and large influence on several parts of your life, while burnout usually limits itself to work and it can be over a longer period of time. So there are a lot of similarities, but yeah, exactly as you said, Alyssa, burnout is usually related to work or some kind of role. Jamie, I don't know whether you have anything to add to that.
No, I think you've both done a great job of that. I think the way that I would think about it is burnout being a risk factor for. So if we're working with someone who is exhibiting those signs and symptoms, describing themselves as that, it's making sure that isn't persisting for a long period of time where some of those other symptoms then might roll in with it. So.
Yeah, exactly. If you talk to a counselor or clinician or anyone who has a background in psychology about this, they will be able to understand and guide you to the right support that you might need. Another question is, what can you do if your manager is not very empathic? Just dismisses any concerns you have about your own mental health.
This is difficult because, look, I mean, a manager should be, that's part of their job, but there are going to be instances where they are not empathetic and you might not feel comfortable talking to them about things. So that's where we go back to talking about building your personal resources. There are going to be some instances where you can't control what is going on in your workplace, and if you don't feel like you have that kind of support in the workplace, then you really have to be strict about kind of leveraging off your own personal resources. So it comes down to self-care and making sure that you are able to switch off at the end of the day. But also, if I don't know, if you don't feel like you're getting support from your manager, but you feel like work is having a real impact, then you might have to talk to someone outside of your direct management team, whether that's someone in HR or someone within your wellbeing team or occupational health, because it is the employer's responsibility as well to make sure that work is not having a lasting impact on your mental health and wellbeing. That's what I'd say. I don't know whether either of you have anything else.
I've got a few thoughts on that. So yeah, completely agree. Kind of what are the controllables and focus on those in terms of the self-care bits. But at work, we know that the number one reason why people leave their jobs is their line manager relationship, and it's a massive area of focus. So first thoughts would be look for who are the champions around. So it might be that your organisation has a mental health champion, a mental health first aider, a wellbeing team, occupational health, something like that. Someone who's in a role where you feel like you've got someone in your corner at work that might be able to be in meetings with you and represent alongside you. I'd also question what's going on for your manager that's meaning that they don't want to engage in that. And it might be finding an opportunity to have a conversation which isn't directly related to mental health, but just builds some rapport and opens up a bit of vulnerability, might lead to a more productive conversation. Nowadays, we've got so many tools and so much evidence out there about the importance of mental health at work that I'm sure Thrive have got plenty, and I know you guys have got other webinars that might be relevant. But thinking some of the big charities, so Time to Talk, Mind, both have got loads of resources which you could use. And I think Wellness Action Plan is a really good starting point. So it's on the Mind website. Is that? So if you go and just Google Mind Wellness Action Plan, then that's a document which you and your manager can work through together, and looking at what are good days, what are bad days. If I'm having a bad day, what can I do? We've done our own version of that for an NHS setting, and I'm more than happy to share that if anyone wants to share email addresses offline with them, but something like that which just handholds the manager through the conversation, because often the barrier can be, I don't know how to open the box, so I'm not going to go there. So a bit of structure for that can be helpful.
Yeah, exactly. And some feel like as well that they are going to be crossing the line by talking about someone's mental health, and so can feel quite uncomfortable about it. But yeah, some really good suggestions there. Do we have any more Q&A? I don't think we do.
There's nothing in the Q&A, so if anyone else has any more questions.
We have one in the chat that says that I'm a parent of a young man with autism. His routines are paramount to keeping any meltdowns to a minimum. We are 11 weeks into shielding him and have not been able to go out. Have you any suggestions on how I can help him cope? It's difficult. We can't give any kind of specific advice, unfortunately, to your situation, because we don't know any of the background. We don't know what sort of normal things that you do together. But I think in this kind of situation, our normal way of living and working has completely been thrown out the window. So it's about trying to adapt and also be, I suppose, as compassionate and as open as you can, and also realistic about what you can and can't do, and not setting yourself unrealistic expectations. Perhaps you could try and establish some more routine within the house, even if that's just getting up at the same time, having breakfast at the same time, maybe engaging in some kind of activities during the day, whether that's kind of PE or exercise classes. There's loads online. But yeah, I'm not sure how specific I can be, because I don't really know too much about that situation. I don't know whether Alyssa or Jamie, you have anything else on that?
Yeah, no, you're completely right. And as you said, his routines are what keeps him from having those moments where he feels like he cannot cope. So it is those routines that you can focus on to help each other and help and support each other as a family as well, and maybe figure out a schedule for the week, or a timetable that you can all keep by, so in order to make things more manageable for you, and just take things one step at a time.
Yeah, agree with all of those. And then the only other bits that I'd add in, I think there's something about whenever we're in a caring role, making sure we don't forget us in that. And actually, if we're in a good place, the people we're caring for are more likely to be in a good place as well, because we all bounce off each other's energy. So if we look after ourselves, then that's going to have a knock-on effect, and so not forgetting that. There's also something about expectations within this. So I think we've found with an awful lot of our staff that when we're looking at, I've been doing 11 weeks, I've been doing 12 weeks, when's normal going to come back, then that's a really tricky situation. It creates a tension. Whereas when we go, okay, well, this is the situation for the minute, we're not going to put a time on that, and we're going to kind of co-create what normal is going to look like for us through this, and not refer back to how things used to be, because I think we all recognise that's going to have changed significantly. And doing that as a bit of a collaborative process might help. And obviously not knowing the specifics, but there are a load of really good resources online, and there'll be a lot of local charity organisations which will be easier to get in touch with, we've found. So it might be worth doing that. I don't know which area you're in, but give that a try too.
Yeah, those are some really good ideas. You might also, if you haven't already, might want to try some, like, setting small goals or activities that he can work towards, whether that's kind of small household chores or something that you kind of decide on together, and then he has something to work towards either in the day or throughout the week. And you can use the app with him as well. So if you want to practice some of those kind of relaxation exercises, it might be good to try the deep muscle relaxation or the calm breathing, because they are those mind-body exercises, and so they're a lot easier to do without kind of having to control your attention or your mind. So maybe try doing that as well. But yeah, hopefully that has been helpful. I don't know whether, do we have any more questions? I see
those are all the questions that we've had for now.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much for joining the session today. We will send the recording out within the next 24 hours, so you will get that. Jamie, thank you so much for joining us as well. It's been really helpful. Perfect. All right, well, thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day. Bye.